Hello, everybody. My name is Barb Whittemore, and I am an AmeriCorps member serving with Conservation Nebraska's Common Ground program. This nonprofit organization aims to improve stewardship of Nebraska's natural resources by increasing knowledge of and concern for the most important conservation issues facing our state. To do this, our focus is on providing educational events, volunteer opportunities, and engaging interested community members in continually working to improve local conservation practices. So today we have a wonderfully exciting event for all of our guests. We are going to be taking a virtual tour, of the UNL Bee Lab. But before we get started with the tour, Dr. Judy Woosmar is going to give us a quick presentation. And Dr. Woosmar has been the assistant professor and extension specialist for the Bee Lab since 2015, and she even conducts her own research on the property. And then after her presentation, we're going to meet with other employees at the Bee Lab as they walk us through their research lab, the various landscapes and habitats, and we'll actually get a close-up look at the actual on-site bee lab, or the bee colony, But as a quick reminder to all of our guests, all of your video and microphones have been turned off. But if you look on your screens, there should be a chat and Q&A function on all of your computers. So if you have any questions, feel free to type them out in that Q&A, and we'll have someone kind of running in the background to be able to answer those questions for you. And then any questions don't get answered throughout the tour, we will answer at the end of the tour. So without further delay, I will pass things on over to Dr. Judy Woosmar.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? I am out here in the bee yard. Thank you. So I'm going to share a quick presentation, and this is kind of a quick overview because there's a lot of people behind the scenes that couldn't be here today, but is part of our group. And through the presentation, I'm going to kind of sprinkle in a few things that basically kind of describe who we are, what we do, and why we do the things that we do. And then that will just be a very short clip to kind of introduce us as a team. And then Courtney and I, Courtney is one of my master's students, and Luke is one of our technicians here doing the videography. But we're going to then walk you through our apiary that you have right back here. I'm going to actually walk you through our some of our research colonies, and then on the other side, where I'm facing, Courtney is going to walk you through the pollinator garden and show you some of our wild bee hotels and talk a little bit about the landscape. And we just recently had our pollinator garden reworked, so she's going to probably show you some vegetation and some blooms that are still available. Okay, so really quickly, this is us. My name is Judy Woosmar. I started in October of 2016, and my research appointment is research and extension, meaning that half my time is focused on research, and our focus areas include things like bee stressors like pesticides and nutrition and landscapes and diseases and pests. But we also focus a lot on better management, because that is really going to help beekeepers recognize the issues and then try to deal with them through mitigation or through management. So there's a number of past and present students. I just wanted to quickly go through some of their research because I think it's critical for us as a research institution and education institution to really highlight all of the collaborative projects that we work with. So we're not just a research group in kind of an isolated university. We are working with partners all across the state, AmeriCorps being just one of them. And we really are trying to design experiments and research that is going to yield useful recommendations. Regardless of what we find, we're going to better understand what is a suitable pollinator habitat, or understand the impacts of pesticides in an environment like ours. So lots of PhD students and some master students. We also have an apiary manager and some outreach coordinator and some research technicians that help us with gathering up the research and managing the hives. Then we have a whole army of undergraduate students that honestly, not all of them are in entomology, so not all of them are interested in insects. Surprise. Many of them kind of fell into it. The ones with the stars are actually youth scholars that went through the Nebraska Beekeeping Association. So that's one of our partners. They were introduced to the field of beekeeping at a very young age, I think between I think that it starts between 12 and 16 years old, and they sponsor a hive and they give you a mentor. And so many of these are moving on to, one is in biomedical engineering, one is in agricultural education, but they've come back to the Bee Lab because they want to kind of still be involved with bettering pollination and pollinators and conservation. And so that's really a testament to our partners and all the youth scholarship programs and other youth-like programs that really encourage our next generation of youth to really get involved in nature and science. So you'll see that some of those undergrads have something that says UCARE or REEU. Those are actually independent research projects that then, because they're so fascinated with these subject organisms, that they start to seek out independent projects, you know, to better understand honeybees and wild bees in the system. So it's very encouraging, and we really like that. We really want to foster not just the research and the education, but also foster the student learning. And why we do it is because they provide critical pollination services for us. And this is not just the bees, but butterflies and beetles and flies. These insects shape the landscape for other wildlife. So they're really a keystone species that really kind of sustains not only our agricultural food production, but our natural landscapes. Honeybees really are the primary pollinators for our ag systems. And so in our lab, we do focus on both the managed honeybees as well as the wild pollinators, because we do see value in both of those systems. So with pollination and active pollination, not all plants require active pollination, but those that do, it actually increases the uniformity, size, and sweetness of many of our most nutritious foods, which is the fruits, vegetables, and nuts. So we like to promote bee and pollinator conservation as ways to keep our own lives healthy. So healthy bees equals healthy lives. We are then able to get all the fruits and vegetables and nuts and really quality fruit too. Many people don't understand that these honeybees don't stay put. They are actually trucked across the nation to pollinate our food crops. So here's a nice map to show kind of the commercial honeybee operation. Many of these crops, or many of these beekeepers are going from state to state pollinating crops and then coming back. Here's a unique picture of a holding yard in California just before almond pollination. And this is just a short list of some of the fruit crops and nut crops that depend on insect pollination. Not all of these are strictly bee pollinated, but many of them are dependent on insects. This picture right here shows almond production, and almond is one of those crops that is 100% dependent on honeybees. And you can see that as California increases in its exporter capacity, I mean, they are the greatest exporter of almonds. You can see that there's almost 1 million bearing acres of almond trees right now, requiring over 2 million hives. And that is a good majority of the total hives in the whole US. So really, we're not meeting pollination demands is what it means. There's not enough bees to do all the crop pollination. Certainly wild pollinators couldn't do the work that these managed honeybees do on, you know, thousands and thousands, millions of acres of one particular crop system. So vegetables, oilseed crops, herbs, and others, there's a lot of different food systems that these bees help with. But we don't just focus on those managed pollinators. There's over 20,000 species worldwide. 4,000 species within the US or North America. And we suspect there's about 400 to 500 species of bees in Nebraska. And that's one of the things that our lab is, and other groups, other partners are looking at is what is our biodiversity? What is our pollinator community in Nebraska? Which species are here? Which ones are threatened? And how do we better protect them in their landscapes? And so that's kind of what we've been doing a lot, is gathering baseline information on where the bees are and what landscapes are best suited for these really beautiful bees. Now, I mentioned the honeybees behind me are social bees. Bumblebees and some sweat bees are also social. meaning that they cooperate in brood care, they have generation overlap, and reproductive division of labor, which I'll talk about when I get into the hive, so I'm not going to go over it here. But what I do want to point out is the majority of bees are solitary. Sometimes you see holes in the ground where it looks like they might live in an aggregation, or it might appear to be a colony, but really each individual hole is a separate individual bee nest. And so it might look like something like this depending on the species of bees. Some are very elaborate in their tunnel making, and some are very simplistic. So these ground nesting bees certainly create really fantastic tunnels and mapping systems, and many of it is species dependent. So that's another area of really untapped research that young, scientists themselves can come, and young generation, girls and boys can come in and interested in the system. This is so untapped that this is a great prime area of researchers better understanding this ground nesting structure and the behavior of nesting bees. Okay, so here's that picture of what it looks like. They actually provision it with a little pollen, and then they lay an egg, and then the brood basically feed off of that pollen. So solitary bees go through and they emerge in the spring. They'll nest and collect pollen, they'll lay an egg, and then they'll pupate or develop throughout the season. Some species of bees overwinter in some of those developmental stages, and then in the spring they come out as an adult. So it's very depending on the different species of bees, but this is generally their life cycle. Courtney is going to show you this. I'm not going to go too much into it, but you're only going to get to see the outside entrance. So stem nesting bees, and these are bees that will burrow into a stem or a block, will actually use nesting materials to line the brood chamber. So the top one is a leaf cutting bee, because they're using leaves, cut leaves, to wall off each individual egg. And then the middle one is a cellophane bee or a resin bee. So again, you can see individual chambers, and each chamber has a single larva or brood. The bottom one's a mason bee, and that one, those little brown balls, is actually a cocoon. So the middle one is in the larval stage, and that brown one is in its pupation stage. So much like butterflies, they go through an egg, a caterpillar, and a pupation stage before they reach the adult. She's going to show you that, but I wanted to show you the inside because the outside is really what you're only going to get to see. And then leaf cutting bees, this is what you're going to get to see today. I have some in my garden that is actually collecting flower petals, which is really pretty, but it's a lot of fun to observe. The point is that because our lab is focused on both managed and wild bees, a lot of the focus and the research and education is really promoting habitat for pollinators, because that can really help all pollinators and many other beneficial insects. So we have a number of projects that focus on enhancing habitat in open spaces like roadsides, and then private agricultural lands, as well as urban areas. So I'm just gonna go through really quickly some of the student research projects. So Kayla just graduated last summer, and she was working with Julie Peterson, Walt Shaw, those are our partners, on a Corners for Wildlife project, as well as Roadside for Pollinators. So they're establishing pollinator habitat on the corners of pivot irrigation fields, as well as roadsides. And then she was looking to see how attractive and which bees were coming to which plants, really helping develop some of those pollinator mixes that do well on roadsides and that do well on crop corners, because not all wild plants do very well. Not all forbs do well and establish well for longevity purposes. So that's part of the research, is really refining seed mixes, understanding how to establish them and keep them going with little maintenance. And we are continuing this project. Walt Schott retired, but John Greshke is going to take over as our plant partner on this. And again, this is a partner. The previous research was with Pheasants Forever and Game and Parks, and this one is with the Department of Transportation. And then she is creating this pollinator habitat program for land managers, NEB guide, which is kind of in the review process right now. So Kayla is one of our master students. Katie was another one who was looking specifically with the City of Lincoln project, the Prairie Corridor project that is funded through Nebraska Environmental Trust. And she was looking at the forbs and bees that were along this 12-mile stretch. And she really was able to find what was available and what was actually visited by bees. And so she was really able to find that not all the abundant forbs were accessible or utilized by the pollinators. So we really want to make sure that we're aware of the functionality of some of our plant choices. Okay. She is also developing an extension deliverable, and this is a larger a circular. So we hope to get this out by the end of the year as well. And now Katie is on to the project coordinator for the Nebraska Bumblebee Atlas program with Xerxes. And I think we can send a link in the chat box if you guys are interested. This is another citizen scientist project you can get involved with in the state that will help us better understand what species of bumblebees we have so we can better protect them. There's a number of them that are threatened and endangered, or their ranges are shrinking, and we just don't have enough people to really understand where those impacts are. Okay, so Natalia is a PhD student who is working more in the urban side of things, because a lot of the plant mixes and a lot of the guidance is on native plants, native plants, native plants. And many of the urban people might feel that some of those native options are a little bit unkempt and not aesthetically pleasing. So her research is really looking at better understanding ornamentals and urban aesthetically pleasing pollinator friendly plants, and practices like deadheading that encourages reblooms. So garden practices that will encourage bloom duration and quality of nectar and such. Okay, there's a number of factors that affect specifically honeybees. This is just a short kind of a graphic to show you those, but this is basically the framework of our honeybee research program. We look at all of these aspects. Tuche just finished a project and published a paper on looking at virus transmission among different social and solitary bees in different landscapes. Bridget is actually working with farmers on site and working to better understand how do we improve beekeeper-farmer relations. So we're also looking at how do we improve collaboration and co-stacking of enterprises. So that's a really cool project with Doug Golick and Kristen Bailey from Center of Rural Affairs. And then Serby is on a hatch project, which really looking to better understand, and this is with the National Agroforestry Center, looking to understand how we can use existing tree lines to better place our pollinator habitats so that we can mitigate against kind of the dust or the pesticide plumes that come off the crop field. And so she's really trying to understand, well, if we put habitat out and we are surrounded by cornfields and soy and farm production, what's the likelihood that we're creating pesticide sinks where the bees are going to get attracted and then become exposed to these agrochemicals and then bring them back? So we're studying this system and how to better design placement of habitat to reduce some of those exposures. So one of the things that we educate people about is the fact that it's more than just lethal exposure. We don't often see this left example of acute exposure leading to lots of piles of dead bees. I'll show you some of our research experiments, but we're really trying to understand some of the chronic and sublethal exposures and some of the indirect effects. That green area, all the impacts on behavior, development, reproduction, and habitat, that's where we think is causing colonies to weaken to the point where they don't overwinter well. And so it may not be the direct cause of a pesticide kill per se. It didn't directly kill them all outright. And we understand that it doesn't have to kill a colony outright to weaken it to the point where it doesn't survive the season. And that's where our research is really focusing on, better understanding this and how do we train beekeepers to mitigate that. Okay, so that's part of the integrated pesticide management for beekeepers. Really, again, this is to empower beekeepers to be proactive about pesticide incidences. We're in Nebraska, we're in the Midwest, we can't get away from it, but how do we recognize those symptoms? And then how do we work with our bees to mitigate those impacts? Okay, I really sped through that because I want to spend as much time in the hive as I possibly can. And this is a great segment to kind of have Courtney play the video. We did a little pre-recorded video so that Madison can kind of show her work. Madison is one of our undergrad students who's working on a independent UCARE project, and that is the undergraduate research activity and research creative activity and research experience. There you go. So Courtney's gonna play that video and I'll be right back. Still shared. Yeah, and then you might have to make sure that the video sound is playing. Screen.
Your screen sharing.
Oh, you're sharing. You're supposed to share. Where'd your video go? Oh yeah, you were sharing your other video.
Oh, I know. It's not hard.
My name is Judy Smart. I run the UNL Bee Lab, and today I'm just going to talk about a little bit of the hives that we have here in our apiary. So these hives are part of our research and education program. So at the UNL Bee So these hives are part of our research and education program. So at the UNL Bee Lab, we do both the research that looks to see how we can better the lives and the honey production and the success, overwintering success of honeybees for research and for beekeepers. And then we also look at a number of ways that we can improve education and so we can better manage these bees. So honeybees are incredibly important for our agricultural system. They're essential pollinators and they pollinate over 90 different food crops, many of which are our most nutritious foods like fruits and vegetables and nuts. And so these bees are part of a research program that looks at a number of factors that can affect colony health. So in our research, we look at things like landscape and availability of nutrition, so the nectar and pollen that bees are bringing in. This hive is actually equipped with pollen traps so that the bees going in actually, when we have the trap on, the bees going in get their pollen loads dislodged and they go in, and then we can collect the pollen here to assess. Here's these little pollen loads right here, so we can see what the bees are bringing back to the hive and what type of nutrition, what type of nutritional proteins and amino acids these bees are getting from different plants. Here we have a colony that is actually strapped to some scales. So these are a way for us to measure how quickly the colony is growing and how much honey they're producing. So we can assess how successful a landscape is in having the proper honey and pollen available for the bees and what that means for their overwintering success. So if we go down this way, we've got a number of other apiaries like this in different locations. And so all of these hives are part of research for different graduate students as well as undergraduate student research. This one is another example. We have another example of a research project that's ongoing, looking at monitoring how we can assess the potential impacts of chemical exposures like pesticides, herbicides, insecticides, and fungicides can impact our bees in a number of ways. So these are called dead bee traps, and it's a monitoring tool that we're trying to develop for beekeepers to better assess whether or not their colonies are being impacted by chemicals and how to better mitigate that exposure through management. So if you do see issues for die-offs or potential problems with a chemical, a pesticide spray, what can a beekeeper do to kind of reverse the impact or mitigate, soften that impact? And you can do that in a number of management ways. So our program is developing and working with beekeepers locally and regionally to develop this program. And then I'm going to turn the camera around to show you another project that we're working on here. This is part of another program research. Not only are we interested in bee stressors, pesticides, pathogens like mites and pest pathogens, and poor nutrition are all really important factors. But poor management is also a real strong factor in whether or not colonies can overwinter or successfully survive a season. So one of our graduate students is actually comparing different hive structures and how that can improve colony development and growth. And so I'm going to introduce Courtney. I'm going to turn this camera around to introduce Courtney, and she's going to talk about her research.
Hi, so Judy kind of prefaced, we're looking at different hive types. And so what exactly does that mean? So this hive right here is called a Langstroth, right? So this is a very typical structure that you'll see, especially with commercial beekeeping practices. However, we're starting to see a lot of hobbyist beekeepers emerging in the field of beekeeping, and these Langstroth hives can be extremely heavy. Those deeps, when full, can weigh up to 80 pounds, which, I mean, a lot of people can't lift that, right? It's unrealistic. So what I'm looking at is different structures that are easier for beekeepers to manage as far as lifting and inspecting and managing their colonies, but also we're looking at the biology of the bees and how they're able to survive within these different structures. So for example, what does honey production look like? Brood production, so are they able to reproduce well and keep a strong population? And also, how do they overwinter? Because a lot of times we see colonies of bees die over the winter. So we want to look at, are these structures suitable for bees to survive and also for beekeepers to manage them? So this here is a structure that myself and Sheldon designed. We call it the Brummel box. So it's different because it's a horizontal structure. As you can see, the deeps go side by side, so it's 3 long. And then it also is compatible with a lot of equipment that beekeepers already use, right? So the frames can fit right in. And then you can also add supers on top so you can still have honey production, which a lot of people, hobbyist beekeepers, that's why they're keeping bees, right? So we're really interested to see how these do as the bees move horizontally rather than vertically like our other structures. So this is one of the hives that we're looking at. Another one is, these are all supers. So most of the time beekeepers use supers just for putting honey in, right? But we're using all supers, and the reason is because they're lighter. So it's easier for beekeepers to lift and maneuver. So we're looking to see how the bees react to a smaller surface area for brood, honey, pollen, nectar, all their resources, right? So this is our second type that we're looking at to see how bees and how beekeepers like that. And then lastly, we have a few more Brummel boxes here, different heights, because again, we want to see how beekeepers like that. And then this is our typical Langstroth setup. So right now we are just putting on deeps to see, how they develop their rates of development for wax production, and of course all those resources that we talked about before. So we're excited to use this for helping beekeepers, and like Dr. Judy Woosmar mentioned, helping with beekeeping management, because that is so critical to helping the bees and to helping out our beekeepers. So.
All right, so Courtney is one of our master students in our program. We do have PhD students that are looking at the impacts of existing tree lines and how we can mitigate drift from cornfields and all the systemic insecticides that are coming off of the cropping systems. And if we put pollinator habitat, can we mitigate some of that unintended exposure with tree lines and existing landscape features? And then we've got a number of other students working on various aspects, like I mentioned, of bee health and bee stressors. So we're back again. So I'm here with Madison King, who's one of our undergraduate research students, and she is actually involved in one of our University Nebraska-Lincoln Zoo Care program. So she is an undergraduate student, and she's not in entomology, but you can see she has interest in animal behavior and in entomology and honeybees in particular. So Madison joined our lab as a technician, and has found honeybees to be so fascinating that she's now starting her own independent project. Her bees, as you can see, Courtney, zoom in here, are quite colorful, and they're marked according to age cohort. So part of her research is looking at the different nuances of honeybee biology and the social complexities of their behavior. So she's looking at which bees are doing what function at what age, and we're going to start implementing treatments so that we can actually look at how these bees are responding to some of our syrups, like syrups that's been laced or dosed with a pesticide or a chemical for research purposes. So, Madison, do you want to talk a little bit more about wax glands and stuff?
Yeah, so what I'm examining is how neonicotinoids affect honeybee wax glands at different stages of development. So that's why I'm marking them by age cohort, so I can identify them when I'm doing my data collection. And what I'm examining is how the wax glands change. So there's been a bit of evidence that they seem to get a little thicker. So I'm trying to narrow that down and identify what exactly is going on there. So.
And one of the really key pieces of our research is that the results that come out of our research programs go right into best management practices for beekeepers. So one of the things that beekeepers really we are encouraging beekeepers to do is regular comb replacement. And because regular comb replacement also means that bees are utilizing resources to produce comb, they may not be producing as much honey. So we do want to find a nice balance to encourage beekeepers to have their bees draw out new comb. And that's one way to kind of purge chemicals and residues that might be lingering in the hive. But balance that with economic development. How do you keep your bees productive in honey production and in pollination services, but also keep them healthy by maintaining low mite and pathogen loads, as well as low chemical loads? And that's what we're doing, is really better understanding how we can balance those and then make those recommendations to beekeepers. I don't know how to do that. Courtney is the brainchild behind all these videography. She yeah, so part of her project is also, yes, Courtney is looking at management and alternative management types. But because we have now entered the world of COVID, she's also starting to learn how to convert our in-person programming, much of the in-person program, into virtual formats. So that is really tricky because beekeeping, as you can tell, is a very practical skill. But her research is also in collaboration with Kimmel Orchard, which is in Nebraska City. And so her hives are here on campus and at Kimmel Orchard. So we are coordinating with Kimmel to do a lot of outreach and education, both for the youth programs as well as adult programs. So that kind of just basically, to summarize everything we do, our students are heavily involved in our outreach and extension. And I truly believe that this is part of my training as a scientist, is that if we continue to engage with the community throughout our education and throughout our graduate program, it changes our mindset of what the value of applied research and really the impact of applied research, meaning research that ends up being applied in some aspect or another. So that's what we focus on. We really are trying to figure out research questions that align with community needs, and to reach out to our partners like AmeriCorps and Kimmel Orchard and Girl Scouts to provide that programming to really emphasize the importance of bees. That's a lot of our youth programming, and we also have this regional Great Plains Master Beekeeping programming, because there seems to be kind of a lack of researchers or apiculturists in the Midwest. And so when I came on in 2017 or 16, I was it. There was nobody in Kansas or Iowa. Now we have Randall Cass at Iowa State University, who's a partner of ours. And we've joined with a lot of Kansas groups and Missouri groups and Midwest groups to kind of help them with their beekeeping programs and targeted trainings. So I think, was there another? Oh, yes. So Courtney's going to play one more video to kind of show you how she's been trying to convert some of the extension programming that we did in person, now kind of trying to convert it virtually and doing kind of a mixed media training program. So it's kind of cool. I'm gonna let her share the video.
All right, hello. So I'm going to tie in a few different aspects with this because this is a tour of our lab, and the Great Plains Master Beekeeping Program is a part of that. So if anyone's familiar with like Master Gardeners or Master Naturalists, basically this is similar. It's for beekeeping though, and it's a program bringing people together, providing scientifically vetted information on beekeeping management. I highly recommend, if you're a beekeeper, joining this group because it has connected people not just throughout the Great Plains, the Midwest, but we have people that are connected with this program throughout the world. It's amazing. So the reason I'm bringing this up, and I'm gonna talk and try to do this at the same time here, is because this Great Plains Master Beekeeping Program has a lot of virtual material, right? And what that takes though is a lot of video editing, and so that we can post those videos and share that material to people that aren't in Lincoln, Nebraska, you know? So I'm just gonna show you what I've been using. Now, some people that do video editing are familiar with Adobe suites. So Premiere Pro is where I work my magic here. And I just wanted to show you what I've been putting together for honey extraction, right? So we're kind of hitting lots of words here because this is another aspect of our lab, is extracting honey that we then sell, and the funds help with our research, which is really cool. Also, you can see the virtual part of this lab tour, which is all the work that we have to do to put together videos and help educate people, especially from afar. So anyway, there's a lot going on here on this screen, but what I want to show you is just the program, and also I'm just going to kind of move my slider through the video I'm producing. And this is the kind of stuff we provide. Instructions on, hey, this is how you take a frame of honey, extract it from start to beginning. This is small scale too, right? So for a lot of hobbyist beekeepers. And let's see here if this will play. I love this. I'm playing with slow-mo. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff. So this is just showing spinning the frames, and the honey is coming out of those cells and basically compiling within this container that then, I'm gonna fast forward, that then honey comes out. This one's also really cool. A little satisfying there. Some liquid gold. So yeah, it's pretty neat. So multiple parts of our lab here, just kind of showing you all that. Yeah, don't you just want to stick your fingers in that? And then of course the final, we do a lot of the straining to get all those bee legs out. And of course then we have the bottling and stuff. That's the last part of it. So yeah, just wanted to kind of share that. Really cool process. And again, we're working overtime to get all these videos together, post them with GPMB, the Great Plains Master Beekeeping, and also through our Bee Lab. So it's pretty cool stuff, and technology is so amazing that we're able to do all that, right? So, all right, so we're gonna bring it back now to the PowerPoint. Great, all right. Very cool. All right, and here's Judy.
Can you guys see me? Yeah. No? There's one more. So, I'm going to move back so that we don't get the feedback. Courtney's going to show the next slide, which is our field demo time. How's our audio? Okay. So as our videographer gets in position, I'm gonna turn the camera around so you can see our apiary. There we go. Somebody coming? Oh, yep, Luke's coming. I didn't know if you needed to spotlight this video, but if you do, you can do that.
Here's Luke. Hi, Luke. Luke's in the vehicle answering chat boxes, the chat questions behind the scenes.
Sorry, we're still getting to the questions. Courtney said she could help out.
And when Courtney is doing her talk, I'll answer more questions as well. You can see I'm suiting up. And of course, if you're new to beekeeping, you do want to wear something a little bit more protective. I've been keeping bees for, I don't know, a long time. So I'm used to the stinging, and I'm used to, more importantly, recognizing when the bees are getting agitated. And so I can work slowly if I feel that the bees are a little bit irritated. Remember, honeybees don't want to sting. If they sting, they lose the stinger and they die. So that is really a last resort.
How do we highlight the video?
The host, if they right click on my picture or my video feed, it'll say Spotlight Video.
And then you hold this so I can shoot up something.
Absolutely. I'm gonna actually show you some cool stuff while Luke shoots up. This is actually a colony that is bearding, or what we call bearding. And it just basically shows the bees getting hot and just hanging out on the surface. And it does seem like it's getting a little warm, so Courtney might need to be prepared with a backup. Okay, my phone's dropped and the screen cracked, and now it gets hot really easy. So I've already opened up this box because I wanted to kind of show you, and nobody needs to see me like heaving 50 pounds. But like Courtney mentioned, during the season, it starts to get really, really heavy. And so you'll see bigger boxes and little boxes. The little boxes are what we call the supers, like Courtney said. It's to collect honey. And so what we actually do at the beginning of the season is, and if you're a new beekeeper, we have these things called wooden frames. And sometimes we'll have a plastic insert or a wax insert. And the bees will start to produce wax and draw out comb. So there that is right there. And so as they pull out and wax that comb out, they will start to deposit and collect nectar. So in this frame, you can actually see the liquidy cells, that is nectar collected from the flowers. Then the bees will start to exude that nectar out in their mouths, and then suck it back up, and then exude it, and suck it up, and exude it, and then they're fanning at the same time. So that process, they're not really playing with the food, they're actually converting that into to honey. So they're incorporating their salivary enzymes to break down the sugars, and then they're removing most of the moisture. And so that's why honey oftentimes won't go bad. So they talk about honey lasting or being good, even in the Egyptian tombs. Honey can crystallize and harden and turn into little crystals of sugar, but that's just a change in physical form. It's still perfectly fine and edible. So here's what it looks like when it's been fully capped. You can see that this is still nectar here, and this is capped, meaning that the bees have processed it and removed the moisture, and this is what beekeepers would uncap. Talking about maybe beekeepers don't do as much management to is this going into office?
Yeah.
Please switch to the laptop. So Courtney's gonna bring the laptop to me. Sounds like my phone is getting choppy internet.
That could be it.
Could be. Is this better?
Maybe we can try it.
Can you guys hear me? All right. Okay, so hopefully this video feed is better. Yeah, it looks like they say yes. So I'm gonna open up another hive. And I took the supers off of that because I already showed you the honey and I'd already showed you that stuff. Now we wanna get deeper into the colony. I wanna show you what the bees look like. So again, these bare boxes is where the bees will start putting brood. And that is what we call the baby bees. And again, you see that I'm not wearing gloves, but I'm also not jerking around the frames. I'm working fluidly, and I'm pulling out these frames gently. This is another frame of nectar. And again, the bees will have all the food kind of on the outside and the brood and the younger bees on the inside, just to protect them a little bit. So honey can be kind of a thermal regulator. If you look deep inside here, you can actually see pollen cells, and those are the yellow colored ones. And so the bees are collecting nectar and pollen. Pollen is what they use for protein, and the bees will consume that as a protein source so they can produce brood food, which is what they feed their young. So I'm going to show you a frame of young. I've already kind of identified these frames. All right. Now again, in this colony, all of the bees that you see are workers. They're females. They're daughters of the queen. There's only one queen bee in here, and she lays about 1,000 eggs a day. And there's the larvae right in here. And let's see if I can show you. You can see the C-shaped larva. That's the caterpillar stage. And if you look real close nearby, you might be able to see a little yellow speck, and that would be the eggs. And so we try to teach the beekeepers how to identify eggs and larvae and brood of all stages so that they can better recognize normal colony functions and age distributions. So as the larvae grow, they pupate and they go through complete metamorphosis in a cocoon phase. Oh, that's... Oh, here we go. Here's the cocoon stage. So you can see that they're actually capped over, and inside they're pupating and turning from that C-shaped larva into a full-bodied 3 body region, 6 legs, 2 wing pairs, kind of a full bee adult. And the development will take about 21 days from egg to adult. For queens, they develop within 14 days, and then for male bees or drones, they develop about 24 days. So the male bees, let's see if I can find one. These are drones. These are stingless. They have eyes that meet at the top of their heads, and their only role is to mate, and then they mate and they die. So unfortunately, you only see them around in the summer, because if they do not successfully mate, they are literally dragged out by their sisters and dumped outside the hive before the winter. No, I don't see any. See any drones? All right. Do we have any questions? Courtney, I don't know if you can. Let's try to see. Oh yeah. So here are some bees that are actually starting to chew their way out. You can see that they're starting to have little holes in here, and they're going to chew their way out and emerge. Let's see if I can find a baby bee. There's a baby bee. So these baby bees, or a baby adults, I should say, are super light colored. They don't have cuticles that have hardened yet, so they can't fly and they can't sting, which is why I'm holding them. But it is really important for us to be able to recognize these baby bees, because bees go through what's called age-based division of labor. And these baby bees, after a day or two of orienting in the hive, their main role is to become nurse bees. They take care of the brood, they feed them, and they just progressively feed them hundreds of times a day. And then as they age out of the nurse bee role, and they become food processors and comb builders. So they might construct wax, and that is by consuming excess sugar, they can actually stimulate wax glands to produce the wax, and they can build comb. And then there's the house processors that are collecting the nectar and the pollen from the foragers and putting them and storing them. The oldest bees are the ones that you see flying in and out of the hive, and they're doing the riskiest task. They're leaving the hive, searching for food, and risking predation, desiccation, and other weather extremes. So they definitely allocate the oldest bees to the riskiest tasks. Okay. That is kind of the hive. I'm gonna go into a smaller hive to see if I can try to find the queen for you and some drones. Yes. Oh yeah. Thank you. So there's a question about the hornets.
Yep.
The killer hornets. Okay, so these killer hornets, or these giant Asian hornets, are very much a predator of honeybees in their Asian country, in the old world country. So they've just been spotted in the Canada border and a little bit in Washington. They haven't confirmed them in Washington, but they suspect that that a colony has died from it. And what they do is these wasps will send out scouts, and they will find a hive, maybe a hive that's a little weaker, and they'll start nipping at the bees. And they'll chop their heads off, and they'll take that head and they'll consume it and eat it. And they'll make their little honeybees into what's called a meat ball, meat wad, and they'll bring it back to the hive. And after a while, they start recruiting more to the hive. And so that's why they call it these murder hornets, because they go through such a massive raid. Once they have targeted and identified a colony, they actually behave in an aggressive manner and will protect that colony or their food source until they've completely depleted all the bees, workers, and food. So the severity of that attack is quite alarming, but certainly they're not a harm to humans unless you are a beekeeper trying to ward off your hornets from the colonies. But right now in Nebraska and even in the US, I really would say that we don't have anything to worry about right now. Yeah. Okay, so this is just remind me what our time is. This is again Madison's hive, so we're going to see a party favor of bees. They're color cohorted, but they are also managed in a smaller colony, so the likelihood of being able to find one bee in, let's say, 12,000, maybe 15,000 strong colony versus something that has 30 or 40,000 individuals. So this is a quite colorful bee colony, and atypical. Again, one of the things that Madison had talked about was wax production, and we suspect that there's more involved in wax production. So that's really what we want to dig into. Again, I just pull out my frames. I'm managing in a smooth, kind of slow method, reaching in there, not banging the bees, not banging the frames. I have a luck of a draw sometimes when you gotta find the queen. Let's see if she makes. This is a queen cup. This is something that the bees will start forming when they are interested in producing a new queen. So she'll lay an egg in there and they'll draw it out and produce a queen. So if your queen gets injured or dies from a disease or a pesticide exposure, the bees will actually take larvae that are very young and feed them a highly proteinaceous food source, and that actually triggers their development into a queen. So the only real difference between a worker and the queen is what they were fed at a critical development stage. And then your drones, like you mentioned, they only serve one purpose. They mate and they die. And that is because they're genetic copies of their mother. So these insects are haplodiploid. They actually have workers that have two sets of chromosomes, one from mom, one from dad, and then drones that only get their genetics from mom. And so it's really cool biological system. And it's a really cool organism to teach people about, you know, the appreciation of nature, science literacy. I mean, there's so many different avenues of education and learning that you can adapt with bees. Ah, here she is. Woohoo! All right, these here.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna actually point her out so you can see her. Where'd she go? Oh, there she goes. She's got a longer abdomen. She's a little bit bigger, and you notice that the bees will kind of follow her around. And there's your queen. She'll lay 1,000 to 1,500 eggs a day, and she will usually live multiple seasons or years, 2 to 4 years, but depending on the environment, there's a lot of chemical exposure or stress. She might have to be replaced once a year. Commercial beekeepers with pollination contracts and services sometimes have to replace their queen 3-4 times a year to keep the colonies going and to keep them productive, because the exposure to the chemicals, the exhaustion from the migratory stress causes the queen to start to fail early. And so we do have to replace her to keep them up. So there's beekeepers that don't do pollination or honey production. They just rear bees to sell to beekeepers and rear queens to sell to queen keepers. And so you can see a retinue forming around the queen. These are the nurse bees taking care of the queen. They're licking her, grooming her, and passing her smells around so that the whole entire colony knows that their queen right. They have a mother who's laying and healthy. To show you in the hive, was there any other questions or any other things that they wanted to see? Yeah, so that's a great question. Why is this comb kind of light colored and yellow versus the other comb that I just pulled out, which was dark? The more generations of brood that go through the comb, the darker that comb gets because of the molts of the skin and the use. And so yes, as the comb goes through multiple seasons, it will start to darken. And so that's another sign that we encourage beekeepers not to just replace comb because they look dark or they seem old, but to be able to identify when the comb is showing brood patterns that indicate these, or brood patterns that might indicate that they were exposed to a chemical and they're having trouble with the food, like entombed pollen. Bees will actually cover pollen cells to wall it off away from their nestmates. So signs like that are things that we try to educate beekeepers to recognize so they can know when to replace comb and not just replace it at the cost of their economic production. Yeah. All right, I'm gonna close this up and we're gonna start to transition to Courtney, but if there's more questions, scream them out. So these are inner hive covers. And as you can see, the colony's getting kind of big, so we're probably going to have to give this colony more space, otherwise they will swarm. And what that means is that the colony is getting so large that they go through colony level reproduction. They'll bud off, and then the queen will take off in a new home, and she'll leave a developing. So they're literally budding off and forming 2 colonies. Yeah. So that's what we're going to have to do with that colony. All right. So Courtney's next.
Yeah, that's good. A few ones are
just like how you do it, if the queen bee ever gets ignored. And someone actually had a more intense question about like sugar water honey before winter time to make sure that they're not like, putting it in the
That's a great question. Okay, so we had a couple questions about sugar water and feeding. We do feed the colonies in the spring. Here, I'll hold it. We do feed the colonies in the spring to build up, and that is basically a 1-to-1 syrup to just build up brood production. And then in the fall, if there isn't enough honey out in the yard, we try to leave over 100 pounds of honey for each colony, and then we take the excess. But if there isn't enough, we can supplement their feed by giving them 2-to-1 syrup, which is a heavier feed for overwintering purposes. And then there was a question about not wearing gloves. And again, it's really, when you start beekeeping, you want to beekeep to your comfort level, which means what you're wearing in terms of, how you're dressed, whether you're wearing gloves or not. And as you become more experienced and be able to recognize the behaviors of the bees and kind of signs of aggression, then you can start stripping down some of the safety gear because you're a little bit more familiar with what the bees are telling you. So that's why I'm less stressed, because I did all that and there was just no stings, and that's atypical, but certainly something that you can do if you're an experienced beekeeper. I won't recommend it for new beekeepers. Okay, and then yes, the queen does get ignored sometimes, but that is a lot of the signaling is all through smells and pheromones or chemical signaling. So the queen can be ignored, especially if her smells are diminishing, if she's sick, or if something is causing her to not lay as much or as frequently, her pheromones will start to diminish. And that will cause the colony to think that they need to replace a queen. Alternatively, sometimes these colonies get so large that the queen, her smells are just diminished just from the sheer size of the population. And so that can also trigger bees to start forming swarm cells to split their hives and produce a new queen. And so many of it is controlled through smells and better understanding of their life history and their biology. But keeping management is much easier once you understand those things. We work with the bees and we work with their instincts rather than fighting against them. So we manage bees in a way that they are instinctually already wanting to do those behaviors. Okay, I'm going to transition so I can have Courtney show you the landscape. You want a videography, and I'll answer chats and we will.
Okay. Hi, everybody. So I know there were some questions on, we're kind of transitioning from honeybees to wild bees or native bees. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And in the process, you're going to be getting a tour of our apiary here at Lincoln. All right, so Luke is going to kind of show you some stuff as I talk, but I just want to note first that, because a lot of people want to help, right? And you don't have to have honeybees to help. That's an important thing to note. Obviously, what you plant helps out a ton. So for starters, a lot of people have lawns, right? And I get it, they're nice and stuff, but they're kind of a desert, right? There's not a whole lot that lives there, and there's definitely no flowers for bees or other insects to forage on. So just kind of throughout our apiary, we've got a lot of clover, and this is a great ground cover, and it's a great source of nectar for the bees. So just something to note there. You can transition your lawns into habitat. It doesn't have to be really tall flowers if you have to keep it subtle, but there's definitely things you can do to help with that. So we're gonna now look at, we've got some really cool nesting sites for our wild bees, because the wild bees, they don't live in boxes like that, right? Honeybees are kind of like the birds, right? So I'm cutting out. Okay, so I'm good. Okay, sorry, we're trying to work with internet here. So we're gonna look at some wild bee nesting habitat that we've built for research, and you can build it at home too, which is really cool.
We lost connection.
Oh crap, yeah.
Okay.
I think I'm gonna grab my, maybe I should grab my, well, if I grab my phone, it's gonna be hard to do.
Should I just set this on the table then?
Come with me. Okay, we're back.
Okay.
Okay, so Luke's gonna get really up close. This is these are a bunch of leaf cutter bees. If you angle yourself that way, super cool. I'm gonna see if you guys can see them. Yes, you totally can. So what we've got here are just wood blocks that we've drilled holes in, various diameters. The important things to note are you want the back of the wood to be solid, and you want the hole itself to not be extremely rough, right? The bees, they don't like that. If you think about it, it's gonna tear up their wings. So, Luke's gonna just, sorry. So if you look closely, you're gonna see little bees flying around, and then also all of these holes are being sealed up. So right now we're looking at leaf cutter bees, so they go out and they literally cut like little semicircles off of different leaves, and then they use that to build their nests. So Judy talked about how throughout this tunnel, the native bees, they lay their larvae and then they put some pollen in it. So the cool thing is some of these bees have yellow on their abdomen, so that's the pollen that they're bringing in to stuff their nest. And some have green, and those are the leaves that they're then using to seal off each segment throughout that tunnel. So just a really cool thing. Anyone can make this at home. I know that there's different nests that you might see in a store. You just want to be careful because like this block right here, we're going to have to replace it, because if you leave these holes throughout like next year, then they're prone to different pests, right? And honestly, most of the time the native bees won't even nest in them anyway. So we always replace our wood blocks every year with new wood, and obviously we just go through and tunnel new holes. But there's also like stems, you know, you can use for nests as well, for nesting material. And those are nice because you can replace them. Now, if you're like, I'm not really super crafty, I don't really feel like building these native bee nests, that's where plants come back into the picture, because your plants are already natural homes for these bees, right? So the stems, when they dry up at the end of the season, you can leave those, and those wild bees, they'll nest in those stems just on their own. So we always encourage, that's why native plants are so important, because not only is it food, but it's also habitat for them as well. So we highly recommend that. And we're actually in the process of kind of redoing our pollinator garden here. So you know, that's something that we're adapting. So there's a few plants right now, but we have a plant list that we will share a link for, so you know what to plant, but also know that you need to look up the native plants where you live, right? If you're not in Nebraska, there's going to be different plants that are native to your area, and a lot of these little native bees are specialists on certain kinds of flowers, right? So for example, this is really cool, but bumblebees, right? They're pretty big, and they can forage on indigo plants. So they're able to pry that plant open, they're strong enough, whereas these little native bees can't. So bumblebees are a very key pollinator for indigo. So just know that diversity of plants is so important, because you're attracting different bees. Those are specific foods for different bees, and also knowing seasonality. So you don't just want to have your flowers all blooming in the spring or just in the fall. You want to provide food year round, just like we want to eat year round too, right? So diversity is key, and having plants blooming, you know, year round if you can. If you're in Nebraska, good luck with that. But definitely from very early spring through the fall. And then leave those plants, leave the stems, leave the seeds, you know, so you can reseed those plants, and it'll provide food and also habitat for those native bees. So super cool. We can look at some of the other nesting that we have for our research. This has like plexiglass in it. So we're able to kind of look at the different nests that have formed. But for the most part, we've got a lot of wood, and it is key to know that a lot of native bees actually live in the ground. So if you want, help those bees out by just leaving some bare soil, and you might find that they start burrowing in there, and they're not going to be a problem. I know a lot of people get concerned, but these native bees are solitary, so they're very different from honeybees in the sense that they don't have this huge concentration of resources to protect, right? They just have their individual tunnels, and so they don't want to sting you. As long as you leave them alone, that they'll leave you alone. So, I mean, you see us, we're standing right by these guys and no problem at all. So definitely don't be scared of native bees. Don't be scared of any bees, right? They're all really cool. So yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah. Bumblebees are a little different. They are a wild or native bee, but they're social. So they will sting you, and they can actually sting multiple times too, unlike the honeybees. So bumblebees are an exception. But again, if you leave them alone, they'll leave you alone. And like I said before, they're super important because they're kind of like the tough bee of the bee world. So we need them to pry open those flowers and pollinate indigo and some of these other plants that otherwise other bees aren't able to reach. So yeah, any questions that we want to address?
No, I think the only note I would add is that the bumblebees, if you do have problems with bumblebees, and you've come across their nest, they are annual. So they are social, but they're annually social, meaning that in the spring, you might see bumblebees the size of my thumb, these ginormous queens. And they're coming out, they basically overwinter as a queen. They come out, they forage for pollen, they start a nest, and then once their workers come out, she stays in that nest underground, and then the workers take over. So you only see the queens in the spring. Then most of the summer, you'll see these smaller bumblebees workers, and if they will be defensive. If you kick up or mow near their nest, they can sting multiple times. The good thing is that these are annual. So at the end of the season, the colony will produce lots of future queens and drones. They'll mate. They'll find that queen will find a new home to overwinter in, and the rest of the colony, including the original mother, will die off. And so if you do uncover a kind of a nasty or upsetting colony, just try to leave it for the season, and it won't be there after fall. And that would be a better solution to just drenching it with a chemical or killing it immediately. Just let it be for the season, and then it'll be gone, and you can re-landscape that area so they don't re-nest or try to re-nest. The other thing is carpenter bees. We get a lot of people asking about carpenter bees because they are also pollinators, but they like to nest in these very big holes and really here's a good example right here. People who get damage from carpenter bees are often told if it's in the middle of the season, you can stuff the hole with a little what is it, the scrubbing iron, what's that called? The metal scrubbers, the metal cloth.
Steel wool.
Steel wool, thank you. I was having a minute there. You can shove it with a little piece of steel wool to prevent the bees from traveling back and forth. And then in the fall, you can putty it over like we did there, and you can repaint the wood. So they like untreated, soft, and kind of degrading wood. So if you give it a fresh coat of paint, plug the holes, that should deter them as well. But remember, these are pollinators. They're annoying, but they also share the same living space as we do. So we gotta find a way to kind of be able to share our gardens and our yards with them. Yeah. And then I think there was a question about BT. BT is Bacillus thuringiensis. It's a biocide. Basically, it's a organism that is used to manage pests. And most BT products are specific for butterflies and beetles. And so most BT type products are going to be relatively safe for bees, but you do want to make sure that it does say be safe. Or if anytime you're selecting some kind of pest treatment or pesticide, even if it's an organic compound, look to see if it's pollinator friendly or less toxic. Some organic compounds, they're natural, but they can still be highly toxic to bees. So there's a differentiation there. It can be organic and good for the environment, but still toxic to wildlife. So you want to find something that is low toxicity and low residual toxicity. So residual hazard. So meaning if you have to use a chemical to treat for a pest in your garden, try to find something that is low toxic and doesn't last in the environment for very long. That way you can spray it at night when bees and insects are not foraging, and by the time the morning rolls around, most of those residues have already gone and left. So many of the insecticides, herbicides, and fungicides can be sprayed in ways or applied in ways that can be pollinator friendly. So practicing IPM or integrated pest management is definitely something we encourage. And even more, we encourage people to practice integrated pollinator pest management, which is considering pest management in integrated ways, but using compounds and options that are pollinator friendly, basically. Yeah.
We're doing great. We have 10 minutes, so we could just do questions.
10 minutes of questions. All right, let's go. Let's post it in.
Cool.
I didn't know. You want to show them your alfalfa leaf cutter video? It was a really cool one.
Yeah.
And then as Courtney is playing the videos, you can just start looking at some of the questions.
Okay, so while I pull this up, I just have some close-ups of leaf cutters, which are pretty cool. So give me 1 second. Great. Judy, while I do this, do you want to talk about colony collapse disorder?
Sure. Yes. Okay. So there was a question about colony collapse disorder and whether or not it's a myth or what it is. CCD, or colony collapse disorder, is really kind of a phenomenon that was coined in 2007 that described when colonies rapidly depopulated and disappeared, leaving only a small amount of adult bees and more brood than those bees could take care of, and maybe a queen. So really, the colony was still alive, but not at a capacity that could actually survive the season. So that's what was coined as colony collapse disorder. The problem with that term is that it only describes one very unique scenario in which a colony may appear when it dies. But we know that there could be over 60 different contributing factors that can lead to colony collapse disorder. We also know that there are a number of different ways that colonies can appear when they die. So it doesn't always have to be a rapid depopulation. It could be massive brood issues or massive brood mortality, or like you saw, mortality in different age groups that kind of just throws the whole colony and their colony functions out of whack, and it really disrupts their honey production, survivability, and their just general health. And so while colony collapse disorder is kind of been mistaken in a number of ways, because not all beekeepers experience those specific symptoms, many beekeepers are experiencing losses, declines, struggling bees. Our lab ourselves are experiencing a bee kill, pretty severe bee kill, and we're trying to study that right now, but it is very complicated. So while CCD may not be the right term to use here, we encourage people to think about pollinator decline, because that is a serious thing, and that is a real thing that's happening, not just to our managed pollinators, but to many of our wild bee systems. Many of the species are either disappearing or their ranges are shrinking. And so, yeah, I think that oftentimes people throw CCD out there as a term, but it's misused and misunderstood. All right.
Yep. Okay, so I'm going to share a couple quick videos here because we talked about those leaf cutter bees. And we just got some really cool footage of them going in and out of their cavities. And like I said before, you can see the ones that have yellow on their abdomen that are bringing pollen back to their nest versus the ones that have green, and those are the leaves that they're using then to basically stuff their nests, form the boundaries between their larvae, and then eventually cap it off. So just really cool, right? Because everyone always thinks of honeybees, right, when we talk about bees, but people don't realize that there's over 500 wild bees in Nebraska alone. That's amazing. And they vary in size and what they forage on. So it's like a whole nother world. So one more really quick video of just a close up of what we're looking at, right? With those bees going in and out of their cavities. So you can see one right here, and I just slowed it down a little bit so you can see her flying off, but just really cool, you know? And then you can get a better look at the leaves and how those are sealed off from predators. And when those leafcutter bee larvae hatch, then they'll chew their way out of that hole after they feed on the pollen. So pretty cool stuff. All right. So, Barb, I'm not sure if we want to take any like final questions, or if there's any that you've seen that maybe we didn't touch on. I know that there's probably a lot of questions, guys, that we missed. Sorry about that. We're trying to bounce between everything here, so we can definitely try to cover the ones that we missed on the Q&A.
There was a question, Kate Parker.
Judy, I think you muted yourself on accident.
Asian the giant honeybee that basically creates an open nest. So they have the same combs just on trees and out in the open. And they actually do migrate quite a long distance each year. And it's fascinating because people are just starting to understand. They come back each year to the same location, despite the fact that the bees that leave are not the same bees that come back. So how that happens, there's several generations in between. How that happens and how that location is imprinted and passed on is still one of those great science mysteries.
Man, there's so many questions.
Yeah, really.
Oh man, and we could talk for hours just on one of the topics. We do that actually. We have workshops and stuff we offer. So
the last two slides.
Yes, and we have a couple more resources.
We're gonna wrap up, which is our final take-home message, and our upcoming events and how to reach us.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And Courtney's sharing that, right?
Yes, I am.
There you go.
Okay.
So final take-homes are basically what Courtney had already said. You know, you don't have to keep honeybees to help the bees. We encourage people to go plant stuff, to think about their own pest management, and then to try to eliminate or try to reduce as much of the aesthetic pesticides or pesticides that we use for cosmetic purposes, you know, and save those chemical uses for things like crop production and food production and things that really need the pest management. And then go out and advocate, because that is how you spread the word, really. So lastly, I know how to work a map. Upcoming events, we do have a Girl Scouts of Nebraska and Kimmel Orchard virtual program, and this is for girls age grade 1 through 8. It's an interactive lesson, so you get an actual teaching box. We stuffed this teaching box with pollinator-friendly plants from Nebraska State Arboretum, different wild bee nest materials like the stem nest, the block nest, the bumblebee nest, and then aquatic insect sampling tools that help us understand insects as biomonitoring organisms. And that gets sent to you guys before the program. Then Courtney and I, as well as Louise Lynch O'Brien, who's a faculty in entomology, and then Julie Van Meter and Dave Nielsen from the Department of Ag are also going to talk about aquatic insect sampling and invasive pests and management, as well as, the bee team is going to be there with pollinators. Courtney's going to show people how to do wild bee surveys, and what we do is actual entomologists. And then every Friday, like she mentioned, we sit and talk about bees. Yeah, and mostly honeybees, but come join us if you want to learn about bees. That's it.
Hey, I just have a couple really quick things, sorry. So in the notes, or excuse me, in the chat box, I've posted links for the Girl Scout event, as well as our virtual happy hour that we hold, and that's over Zoom as well. So that's every Friday from 5 to 6. Really, really cool. The conversations vary. We try to do the same thing where we answer a lot of questions in the chat, but there's also a lot of opportunities to interact. So we really enjoy that. And of course, if you have any questions at all, you email us at that email on the slide, and definitely follow us on Facebook, because we do a lot of informative and fun stuff there, especially with things being virtual, so virtual right now. And then last note, I noticed that there was a lot of questions on those wild bee nests. So I'm going to put together a little guide on just kind of recommendations, diameter and length and materials. There's so much. And I've actually done a lot of research trying to find what is it that really works best, because I'm pretty skeptical on the ones that you can find in the stores. So I will send that guide to Barb, who is the host of this event, and she will send it out to all of you since you've registered. So yeah, so you can get those resources. There's tons on our website, like we've been posting. And yeah, I know there's also a lot of questions on, is this going to be recorded and shared? Yes. So you can watch this video again as well.
We'll post it on GPMB.
We will, yep. And we'll also post it on Great Plains Master Beekeeping website. So thank you guys so much for having us. Barb, thank you. We've had so much fun, and the questions have been just fantastic. So thanks for being such a great group.
So Barb, it's back to you.
Yep.
All right, you guys, thank you so much for attending this event, and a huge thank you to UNL Bee Lab, to Judy, to Courtney, to Luke, everybody that helped out. It's not easy to record this outside where there's not the best Wi-Fi and everything, but you guys did an amazing job getting everything to work, and you're so fun. Judy, I loved your reaction when you saw that queen bee. It was the best thing on the planet. It made my day. Otherwise, you guys, that is all we have for you today. So if you guys want to log out, you definitely can. And when you do, it'll take you to a survey, so you can fill that out for us. Let us know how we did, what you liked, what you didn't like. And that way we can use that information to do even better the next time we do this event. So everybody, thank you so much again for coming. You guys were awesome. Again, a huge thank you to the UNL Bee Lab. You guys were perfect. Otherwise, you guys are free to go. Have a great rest of your day. We'll post these videos on the ne.conserve.org site if you want to go there to find them. And bye, Luke. And so otherwise, we'll see you guys next time. Have a great day.
Hey, thank you so much. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.